to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I read in May and June. So if you enjoy this type of content and other homeschool and lifestyle content, please remember to subscribe and let's get into it. All right, so I basically got through 6 books in May and June. Part of me I think thought I'd do more, but also I'm impressed that I did that many. I had ankle surgery, if you don't know. And so I thought with all the downtime, I'd read more and stuff, but part of it was I was just like really tired. Every time I read it would just make me fall asleep right after surgery, and then I was sick with a yucky cold. So every time I'd read when I had a cold, I also just wanted to fall asleep. So I didn't get quite as much done as I thought, but I also am impressed by how much I did. I might have read a few like more fluffy romance books on my Kindle. I can't actually remember, but I'm gonna share with you today the 6 books that I do remember reading over May and June. And so I hope you enjoy listening to these book reviews. All right, so the first book is The Chemist, and this is by Stephanie Meyer, who wrote the Twilight series, if you are familiar with them. I actually only read maybe the first and second book. I can't remember if I went any further than the second book. I just was not that interested in some of it. Anyways, I just didn't keep reading them after that. My husband has actually read all 4. He's very much someone that if people are talking about books a lot, he wants to see what the hype's all about. So he did read them and I did not. And then when I first heard about this book, I can't even remember who I heard about it from. Oh, you mentioned it. Someone here mentioned it. That's where I heard it from. Someone recommended it and I was like, oh, we'll try that. And I think I thought the author was different. It took me a second once I saw it to be like, oh, this is Stephanie Meyer who wrote Twilight. The same, but the book is very different as far as even just the scene, the setting of the whole book, everything is very different, I feel like, than the Twilight series. So it's about, I don't know if I'd call her a spy, but you know, more of like a Navy SEAL type situation, sort of like that. And where she has these very special abilities, that's why it's called The Chemist. And now she's being hunted by some sort of US organization. I don't know. It doesn't really go into specifics a lot about all those different things or even what she's necessarily a part of, but it's kind of that idea. And she ends up, like, it's a romance story, so she ends up having this guy that she's with and protecting, but not. I'm not gonna tell you too much because it will give the whole story away. So I'm like, what do I say and what I don't say? But it's really, like, even from the get-go, it's pretty just intense most of the way through. There is a little bit of sexual content if you are worried about that as well. I try to read fairly mild stuff, me personally, so if that says anything. And swearing is very, very minimal too, if there is really any. There's, you know, it's pretty minimal. But I really liked it. I read it pretty fast. It's a fairly hefty book, if you can tell. And so it just goes through this whole story. So if you like anything I went through a spurt of really liking Tracy Abrahamson's books. And if you are familiar with her books, they kind of started to be the same types of books, just rewritten a little different. So I stopped reading them as much, but she wrote about Navy SEALs and like covert ops and that kind of stuff, which I think is fun to read about. Outside of Regency romance, I don't read a lot of other genres, and that's one that I enjoy. I don't know if it's considered a genre, but that topic is something I enjoy reading about. So this is similar to that, just kind of a more military-minded spy operation sort of situation. So if you like that kind of stuff, you should try it out. It was a really good read, a quick read. I really, really enjoyed it. All right, so the next book I wanted to mention was Into Thin Air. So this was actually inspired, I think I mentioned last time that I become a little bit more fascinated with Mount Everest because Brooklyn and Bailey and Mindy McKnight we're talking about Everest a lot. So Brooklyn went to base camp, and so did her mom, Mindy McKnight. If you're familiar with them on Instagram, you know, Heritage, ITK, all those brands and stuff are from them. And so they hiked to base camp with a few, like one of their other siblings went, Brooklyn's husband went, and there were some friends and other family members and stuff that went and hiked to base camp. And I just knew very little about what that even meant to hike to Everest Base Camp until I was watching them on Instagram talk about it. And I like hiking. I don't feel like I really have a desire to hike to Everest Base Camp. I definitely do not want to hike Everest. And a lot of people ask that, like, why didn't you hike Everest? And they're like, because it's extremely dangerous and still so many people die, like even now in this modern age, so many people die. So as they were hiking, there was some little, I don't even know what they'd be called there, but sort of like memorials to people that had died on the mountain. And so one of them was for, I can't even think of his name. The author is one of the people that was hiking with him. And for some reason, I'm like, what is his name? Okay, I looked it up in the front. Luckily, they have all the names. Rob Hall. So if you're familiar, I wasn't familiar with his name. Maybe I'd heard it before, but it wasn't something that I just ever was like, oh yeah, Rob Hall. But he's from New Zealand and climbed Everest several times. And he actually died on this expedition on Everest. Spoiler, it's not a spoiler alert, but that's why I got the book in the first place, because I was like, oh, I was looking up Rob Hall and it mentioned this book. This John, I don't know how he says his last name, was on the expedition with Rob Hall. And so this book is talking about him hiking up there and the experience of it all. And just him talking about it, I'm just like, oh my goodness. It's like once even before you get to base camp, you're just, your body's already dying because you don't have enough oxygen and stuff. But it's just like, it's just crazy to read about. And there was this crazy storm that blew in, which is what caused a lot of deaths during this particular expedition up Mount Everest. And so he goes through that and tells, what he can recall, or at least his side of the story, as he's trying to hike back down in this storm and everything. So like, it's intense, and it's also just like, oh my goodness, like thinking about it. And it's not just, if you like hiking, it's not just this like, oh, I'm gonna go on a hike. Like, this whole thing is just, like I said, you're dying the whole time because your body's not getting enough oxygen. So you're just moving very slowly. Your brain stops working, everything's not functioning super well. And I want to say I enjoyed reading it. I'm always hesitant to say that about these types of books, but it was fascinating. That might be a better term. I don't know. But it was fascinating learning more about it. The earth is amazing. And I know we try to defy it sometimes, but even when you are an expert and know something so well, like Rob Hall with Mount Everest, stuff still happens. And nature is unpredictable, and we still have to be so careful and remember too that nature is in charge, right? There's nothing we can do to really control it. We can't control it, and stuff's gonna happen regardless of whether we're experienced climber and know all of our stuff or not. Okay, so I have several books to mention that are book club books. They're not actually ones we've met and talked about yet. And I haven't gone to book club for a while just because of like having a baby and how late it is. I'm an old grandma. Just kidding. I prefer to get up early. I've always been like that. And so I'd rather just go to bed earlier. So anyways, I just haven't been going recently, but I still follow all the books that they post about on GroupMe. And so I went and got them. So this is kind of what they're doing over the summer. So Go as a River is one of them. And this book is really good. It's also extremely heartbreaking. I'm like, it's one of those books that I feel like the ending, yes, you can walk away feeling like pretty good about it, but it's just, I guess it shows the reality of life, which, we have to read books about that because that's just what really happens. We all like happy endings. We like things that are just kind of fluffy and everything like that. But reality, I think, is just, we learn so much more from that. But this is about a town, I believe it's in Colorado, Iola. I don't know if I'm even saying that right, but it's based on or inspired on a true story of that town. I think being underwater now, it used to not be because they built a dam and then flooded some of that area. So this particular girl, I think, is around 17 when the book starts. and they have peaches, and they, you know, have really good peaches. And they've been able to plant them and get them to grow in a place that people wouldn't have thought they could and stuff. And so it's this girl with her dad and her brother, her younger brother, and an uncle, I believe. I can't remember. She already has a very messed up family situation right at the beginning. You know, she doesn't have, her mom has passed away. There's just a lot of already issues, but she's kind of taken on that role as a mom figure. And she meets a boy that's a Native American and not treated well. This is taking place in the 1960s, and he's not being treated very well. Everyone is just like, go away, we don't want to see you here in our town and stuff. So it's a love story that way. And then there's some tragic things, and there's good things and more tragedy. And again, these books are hard for me to like really explain to you because I don't want to ruin the story for you, but that's basically the idea. And it ends with her much older, going through her life story with the different struggles she had and still being able to become a very strong woman, which I think was kind of maybe not the whole theme of these books, but the next one I feel like also has that kind of like women can be very strong attitude. But I really enjoyed this book. It was a fairly quick read, and it kept me engaged. Like I wanted to keep reading it. And I feel like there's really good discussion topics in here too, which is why it would make a really good book club book. I can't talk right now. Everything's like getting twisted. So I think it'd be really good for book club. The next one, which is also a book club book, is Wayward. And this one, I really loved it. I'm also hesitant to say that because the premise, I don't know, it's kind of complicated. Again, trying to explain things without giving away the story. So this book is covering 3 different time periods. And sometimes I like books like that, and sometimes I really don't like books like that. I feel like this one did a good job. And so it's 3 women, and I can't remember all the time periods. One of them's very old, kind of like Salem witch trial-ish. And then it comes a little bit more forward, I believe. So 1619 is where it starts. And then one of them's in more modern day, like just a few years ago. And one, I think, is World War II-ish, yeah, 1942. And so it's covering these 3 women. And as I started reading their stories, there's ones that I thought I would enjoy more. I'm like, oh, I really just want to get back to this storyline or this storyline. But as the book goes on, I feel like all the storylines kind of became like that. I was anxious to see what was happening in each one. So it goes through all these different women and their stories, and it tells, I think, a little bit about them back here. So it has a girl that's kind of being treated like a witch. They're like, she's a witch. And so she's going to trial in the 1600s to see if she's going to be hanged or not. So it goes through her story and kind of discusses the whole trial situation she was going through. And then in 1942 is World War II going on. And this is taking place in England. Like this girl is living in England. I think all of them are basically supposed to be based out of England area. And that's what the Wayward is, a family name. So again, I'm trying to, like, I don't want to give too much away without, you know, telling you kind of what's going on. And then, so this particular girl, Violet, has different family struggles and stuff like that. She comes from a more prominent family. I can't remember if her dad was an earl or something like that. And so she comes from this prominent family line, but she's also very different. And the reason they have all these animals is because they have some sort of pull towards animals or tie to animals and bugs. I would hate having a pull towards bugs. But they just have, so that kind of the theme runs throughout the book, which is why the cover looks like this. And so it goes through her storyline as well as I think maybe her later teens. It's sometimes hard to keep track of how old everyone is. The last timeline is, like I said, more recent, like more modern day. And someone that left London, left an abusive relationship and goes to stay in the countryside and at her aunt's cottage that was left to her. And so then it kind of weaves these stories together and how they all work together here. And I I really enjoyed this book. First of all, I really did. It was so engaging. I wanted to keep reading it. I feel like if you you could take this book the wrong way, because I feel like it kind of, like, there are a few good men in this book, but it is pointing to a lot of negative relationships with men. And so you could take it that way, where it's like women don't need men or all men are bad, which I feel like obviously that would be the wrong way to take it, because that's not true. But I feel like that could happen with this book. But that could also be something that's a really good discussion topic for book club. So I feel like, again, this book has a lot of things that are important to discuss, because it is talking about these very strong women that overcame very trying, hard circumstances. And so that's important, you know, to be able to talk about as well, but also that men are these horrible people that maybe this book depicts them a little bit more to be. And so there's kind of that balance I feel like you have to strike there. But I really enjoyed it. There is a little bit more intense sexual content and more like abusive sexual content, not like, you know, consensual type stuff's going on. So just, it's not, you guys know I hate commenting on this kind of stuff, because I just don't know what people think or what they like to read or whatever. But it's mild to moderate, I would say. But again, I don't read anything crazy, so I don't know what people's gauges are. But I really did enjoy this book. Again, so interesting to discuss with a whole bunch of other people, especially a whole bunch of other women. I think it'd be interesting to go through all the topics in this book. Okay, we're gonna take a break from a few book club books and talk about Under the Cover of Mercy. This is by Rebecca Conley, and I have read several of her books. She just recently started writing a little bit more historical fiction type stuff, and that's more, I would say, nonfiction. It's not completely, obviously, but it's a little, it doesn't have as much of her normal storyline. She wrote a lot of like Regency romance sort of type stuff, and she might have even written some Regency like spy stuff. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, she had some like different spy organization ones throughout like London and things like that during Regency time periods. And I really enjoyed those books. I really liked, she wrote one about the Titanic, and I really like that one. This one, I'd say, is kind of in the middle. Like, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. And this one's about World War I, about a nurse in Belgium who wants to be able to help everyone. Like, they're under German rule, and they're like, you can only help the Germans, and then the other nationalities that come to you, basically, they have to be sent to us, like imprisoned and all that kind of stuff after that. And they wanted her to show preference, but she is like, I'm part of the Red Cross. We don't show preference. We help everyone and try to make better situations for everyone. So they ended up doing some sort of an underground situation where they would bring in like British soldiers that were injured. They'd take care of them, and then they'd help them get out of Belgium and get safe. And so eventually, you know, it talks about how she gets caught and everything. So it goes through her story, and it is based on a true story. I can't remember, I read parts of the back of this. I can't remember all the things, how completely factual it is. And I have another one of her books too. I think it's more about World War II. But yeah, so it has like pictures here of the actual person. So these books, they are historical fiction. Obviously, it's not all completely true, but I feel like they run a little bit more towards facts than some historical fiction that's just kind of putting you in that time period and throwing in a few things that might be factual, but having a more engaging storyline that way. So this one's engaging, but also, since it's more nonfiction, it is sometimes a little bit harder to read. So I really like her Titanic one though, and I'll have to let you know about, I think the other one they said is more World War II, but I'll have to read that one and let you know. But if you like World War I books, or just learning some more about history in a little bit more of a storyline form instead of just reading the facts, I feel like this is a really good option. All right, the last book I have to mention is another book club book, and it's The Comfort Crisis. Everyone should read this book. So good. So good. So So Michael Easter is the author of it, and he goes through and just talks about how some of our comforts, that sounded really weird, of modern day living are harmful to us, or they can be harmful to us if we're not careful. And just, it talks a lot about like our ancestors and how they were a little more hunter-gatherers, right? Certain foods they ate. There's a whole section in here that talks about eating, which I really, really loved. And so it goes through some of those things, but also how they would carry a lot more type of weight. They'd have to kill their food and then carry it a long ways back to their homes, how they moved a lot more. You know, obviously there are disadvantages to living during those time periods, but there are also just a lot more active society. And compared to what we are now, especially in America, we just sit around a lot of times all day long, and it's very easy to not move that much if we don't want to. And sometimes I think we don't even recognize that. We don't recognize, like he even had talked about someone that he's like, oh, show me your watch so we can see how many steps you got today. And I think it was like 4,000 or 5,000. And that's probably more normal than we think. Even my husband recently, like he has a standing desk, but didn't realize how much he's actually not moving in the day until you put a watch on and pay more attention to that, or be more proactive about moving, because our lifestyle now just makes it so easy to just sit around and not do much. And so that leads to health problems and leads to, you know, a lot of muscle loss and all the back problems and all these things, just because we're not moving around that much. So I like the way he went through and told all these things, because he tells it through a story of his where he went to Alaska for 30 days, like in the back country, basically the Arctic area, Arctic tundra, to hunt a caribou with two guys that were more familiar with that. Like they were kind of, they weren't guides necessarily, but sort of. And it has a name. I don't even know how to say it the right way. Misagi, possibly, is the right, I don't know. But it's a journey that's very, very hard. Basically, almost to failure. And you have to push through, and you still might fail, but it's just something that requires so much of you. And what we can learn from those types of experiences of really pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones and doing super, super hard things that we could 50-50 fail at, right? There's a very big likelihood that we will not be successful. And how it teaches us that failure is how we learn, and to become more comfortable with failure. Sorry, I said comfortable, which sounds funny when we're talking about the comfort crisis, but so he goes through and he tells his whole story of what it was like, which is hilarious. Like some of the things I'm like, man, this is crazy. Like the planes and how they just left him in the middle of Alaska while he had to wait for the next plane. He's all by himself because there wasn't enough room for him. All this just, I'm like, wow. And then how he has to pack out all this caribou and how heavy it was. And he talks about rucking, if you've heard of that, where you walk with weight, and just how helpful that is. Like military uses that all the time for special ops or Green Berets, all the special forces, to get like medium-sized, very strong build people, not humongous, but not also just teeny, but just walking or hiking with weight is very, very helpful. And he talks to many different people about all these different things, about food, about meditation, the importance of talking about death, how especially in America we don't talk about death and are not okay with it. So he goes and talks to monks about that. He talks to some people, like I said, about food. And he just goes through and shows a whole bunch of different research, but also tells his story, and it's kind of interwoven together throughout the whole book. And I just thought it was so, so good. There's so many good things in here, so much to learn. Like I have all these things down here with all my quotes and notes and stuff that I just loved from this book. And it's just so good, because I feel like it is something that we really, really are struggling with right now. And to push ourselves outside of the comforts of our normal life, of having technology, of having a house that we can turn on the thermostat if it's cold, or turn on the air conditioner if it's hot. You know, just all these things that make it so easy to be comfortable can also be harsh on our bodies, mentally, physically, like all the different things that are going on. So we have to find that balance between living in our modern day comforts, but also pushing ourselves to do things that might be uncomfortable. And he specifically talks about being in nature and being unplugged. You know, I think a lot of times we'll go out for walks and people will have earbuds in and they're still listening to something, but the importance of just being totally unplugged and either listening, you know, to the people you're with and having a conversation, or just being aware of nature around you and quiet. How we don't, you know, everything is just so noisy all the time, especially if you live in a city, the importance of that quiet. So it focuses a lot on just the importance of getting back to nature, of being outside, of doing some hiking or things like that that are really hard, or rucking that's really, really hard, that pushes you outside of your normal comforts, are very good for your physical health and your mental health. So I really, really love the book enough that he has another one, I think, that's more about the brain. I can't remember, but I ordered it because I like this one so much. All right, it's much later in the day and I remembered that I'd forgot to tell you something about the Comfort Crisis book that I was going to say. I'm like in the middle of doing other things and filming another video and was like, oh my goodness, I didn't even mention this. And the thing is it has a lot of swearing, particularly just one swear word, really. The F word is said so many times in the book. Just FYI for you, most of the time he's quoting somebody else, and so he's like directly, you know, taking their direct quotes, and so it shows up a lot. And one of the guys that he travels with on his big Alaska trip that is woven throughout the whole book is, he's like, he uses the F word like every other word in a sentence. And so as he quotes what this guy says while they're on their trip, you get a lot. And I am not particularly fond of it. I don't love it when that happens. But especially if you listen to this book, like, just beware too that there is a lot. But I was sitting here, I was like, I can't believe I forgot to mention that. You know, I mentioned all the other things about the books, disclaimers and stuff, but I didn't mention that one about that book, and it's pretty big. So there you go. That's my little pop-in disclaimer that, just in case you were wondering or wanted to know, it's there quite a bit. All right, so those are the books that I read over the last couple months. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have book suggestions, again, I love them, obviously. I picked from a lot of them to what I should read next. So put your book suggestions down in the comments. And if you enjoy seeing book reviews, remember to give me a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.